When's the funeral? I asked. Caleb didn't answer. Then cold and flat, she never mentioned you. My ears rang. I stared at the phone thinking I misheard. What? She didn't list you as next of kin. She didn't want contact. No name. No time. No goodbye. Just gone. I couldn't breathe. I pressed my hand against the wall, needing something solid. My daughter was dead, and her husband said I didn't exist. I raised her. Alone. I worked double shifts, gave up painting, gave up love. I gave up everything. And now, I'm nobody.
Did she? My voice cracked.
Did she suffer? A pause. It was quick. She had cancer. Pancreatic. I closed my eyes. No one told me. Not one damn word. Service was private, he added. Family only. I bit my lip till it bled. I am her family. The line went dead. I stood there, still gripping the receiver. My fingers numb, my chest hollow. Melanie was gone, and they'd buried her without me. No call, no message, no chance to hold her hand, to brush her hair, to say, "It's okay, baby. Mama's here." They took even that. I walked to the kitchen in a daze. My knees buckled. I sat on the floor. She never mentioned you. What kind of daughter doesn't mention her mother? No. What kind of man erases a mother? Melanie loved fiercely. As a child, she clung to my leg in grocery stores. She wrote me poems in red crayon. She once screamed at a doctor for giving me the wrong meds. But after she married Caleb, she changed. First it was missed calls. Then Christmas cards with just her name. Then silence. I thought maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I was too much. Too protective. Maybe I hugged her too long. Or cried too hard when she left town. I blamed myself over and over. But now I saw it. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. Caleb didn't just marry my daughter. He took her. And now he buried her. Without even a warning, I wanted to scream, to punch something, to tear the damn walls down. But I didn't. I sat there on the cold tile, hands shaking, whispering her name. Melanie, Melanie. I couldn't stop the tears. They came in waves, ugly, guttural, from places I didn't know I still had. She was my only child. I raised her through storms. I carried her through the flu, the bullying, the rejections. I held her when she failed her first art show and said, "You were born to color the world." And now, she died in silence. And I wasn't even there to kiss her goodbye. I don't remember standing up, but I found myself in the hallway, pulling open the drawer with all her old letters. Dust. One card sat on top. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Love, Melanie." Dated 2019. That was the last time she wrote. I held it close. My heart ached so loud I thought it would shatter the windows. She too did love me. Once. I know it. I needed to know more. I picked up the phone. Called the hospital. "Sorry, ma'am," the nurse said. Her husband had all permissions. "We can't share records." I asked one question. Was I ever listed? A silence. Then soft, yes, initially. Then it changed to no contact. But I remember her asking for her mother once. She cried. My legs gave out. I clutched the wall. She wanted me. Yes, she did. That was all I needed. They kept her from me. I wasn't absent. I was cut off. I hung up. Walked to the living room, put the Christmas card on the table, and whispered, "You didn't forget me?" Then I made a vow I would find the truth, and I would speak for her, even if no one else would. I hadn't touched that trunk in years, but that night, after the call, after those 6 words broke me, I opened it. The latch creaked. Dust lifted like memory smoke. Inside sketches, letters, little folded papers with doodles and notes. To Mom? For Mom? Don't throw away. Important. I knelt, heart thudding, fingers trembling. The first thing I pulled was a crayon drawing. Melanie at age 6, a sun with sunglasses, a house with purple smoke, me with giant green glasses and a smile so wide it touched my ears. On the back, my color keeper. Love, color keeper. That was what she called me. I used to mix paints with her after school. Blue and yellow made green, red and white made pink. She thought I was magic. "Why does pink feel softer?" she once asked. "Because we make it gently," I told her. Now, everything around me felt gray. Cold, like life had drained itself of hue. I picked up an old shoebox marked middle school. Inside were pieces of her first comic, Star of the Fireflies, a girl with glowing hands who used light to escape a silent world. I remembered that story. She read it to me under the covers with a flashlight, said it was about kids who couldn't speak but could still shine. She said, "Some people just need someone to see their light." I choked back tears. Why would a girl like that, so full of feeling, cut her mother out? Or was she never allowed to reach me? Caleb was always polite, measured. He'd kiss her on the cheek, call me ma'am, hold doors. But behind his calm, I felt walls. Walls that grew higher every year. The last time I saw Melanie, she wore a beige sweater. So plain, so unlike her. No earrings, no color on her nails. Her voice was small, careful. She kept glancing at her phone. Sorry, Mom, Caleb needs me to check in. Check in. Not call, not text, check in, like a soldier reporting back. At the time, I told myself she was just busy. But now I wasn't so sure. I pulled another drawing from the trunk, a small canvas smeared with bold orange streaks. At the bottom, scribbled in pencil, even fire needs air. It hit me. Maybe she had been burning. Quietly. Without oxygen. Without me, I sat there on the floor, surrounded by memories in color and truths in silence. And for the first time since that call, I didn't cry, I planned. Near the bottom of the trunk, I saw a black folder. It wasn't labeled. Just old, with bent corners. I opened it. Inside were torn pages, hand-drawn panels, and fading ink. No color. Just black outlines, sketched fast, almost frantic. The Fireflies Girl draft. The title hit me like a jolt. Melanie had once shown me a version of this. Years ago, when she still called every Sunday. But this version was different, darker, unfinished. The first page showed a girl inside a glass box. No words. Just her eyes wide and desperate, and tiny fireflies outside the walls. Glowing. The next a hand reaching in, then pulling back over and over, then a note scrawled in relief. She can see the light. But no one hears her scream. See, I froze. This wasn't fiction. This was Melanie. I flipped to the back. Pages were missing. Some torn clean, others half ripped. There were knife marks where the binding used to be. Someone didn't want this story told. My heart pounded. The girl in the box wasn't just a character. She was trapped. Watched, muted. I touched the torn edges. The violence of it felt fresh, like whoever did it had been angry, careful but furious. And Melanie, she had kept it anyway. Hidden? Why? Because maybe. She wasn't allowed to finish it. I remembered her last visit. She looked thinner. Her laugh didn't reach her eyes. She kept glancing at the door like someone might walk in. When I asked if she was okay, she smiled too fast. I'm just tired, Mom. But now I saw it. She wasn't tired. She was suffocating. This draft, this torn, hidden piece was her voice, scratched in urgency, buried in silence. Someone had tried to erase it. I didn't know when. I didn't know how. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was waking up. Whatever happened to my daughter didn't end with her death. There were pages missing, and I was going to find them. I walked into the station with my back straight and my fists clenched inside my coat pockets. The clerk behind the glass barely looked up. Can I help you? My name is Janet Holloway, I said. My daughter passed last week. Melanie Holloway Rhodes. He typed, clipped, frowned.
I waited.
Date of birth, he asked. I gave it. He typed again, then shook his head. There's no record of next of kin listed under your name. I blinked. I'm her mother. Less, ma'am. But there's no emergency contact, no funeral notice sent to you, no legal mention. No mention at all. He turned the screen toward me. There it was, blank under maternal family. No phone number, no address, just a dash, like I never existed. I felt my knees threaten to give out. I forced myself upright. Who filed the paperwork? I asked. Her husband, he said. Officer Rhodes, of course. He was one of them. I knew Caleb had become a deputy sheriff years ago. Thought it was just a small-town job, something steady. But now, it felt like a fortress. He had connections. He knew the systems. He knew how to make things disappear, including me. I left the station jaw tight, heart burning. Each breath steamed in the cold air, but I didn't feel it. I barely made it home before the phone rang. An old landline. Hardly anyone used it anymore. I picked up. Hello, Janet. It's Vera, from back on Pine Street. Remember? Of course. My voice cracked. I just heard, she said. I'm so sorry. I wish I'd called sooner. There was a long pause. Then Melanie tried to visit you once. About 2 years ago, I froze. She showed up at my house crying. Said she couldn't get a signal on her phone. Caleb had tracked her car. She said he was on his way. She asked if she could just stay the night. I sat down. What happened? I whispered. He came. She left with him. Didn't say a word. Silence stretched between us. Then Vera added, she looked terrified, Janet, like someone who wasn't allowed to run. I held the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. Thank you, I said, for telling me. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet. A different kind of grief began to bloom. Not for what I had lost, but for what had been taken. Back home, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the envelope like it might answer me if I stared long enough. It hadn't changed since the day it arrived. Still stiff. Still too white? I picked it up. The paper felt colder than it should have, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with weight. I turned it over and studied the postmark again. January 19. They mailed it the day after the funeral. Not before, not during. It was never meant to be an invitation. It was a statement, a formality, a reminder of where I stood in their version of her life. Outside the door, unacknowledged. I peeled the envelope open carefully this time. My fingers shook, but not from grief anymore. From clarity. Inside was the same folded sheet I remembered, printed. No handwriting, no warmth. In loving memory of Melanie Holloway Rhodes. Private family service held January 18 at Evergreen Chapel. No mention of time, no list of mourners. No pastor's name, no flowers, no eulogy, no contact number. No mother, just a name, a date, and the word private, private. It echoed like a locked door slamming shut. I held the paper in both hands and let my eyes scan it again. Slower. This time, I wasn't reading as a mother. I was reading as someone who'd been written out. There were no signs of Melanie in it. No hint of who she really was. No mention of her art, her laughter, the comic books she used to make, nothing about her favorite color tangerine, or how she used to hum when she brushed her hair. This wasn't a tribute. It was an erasure. And I was part of it. I sat down slowly, the paper still in my hands. It trembled, or maybe that was just me. I opened my notebook, the one I'd used the night before. Page 2. I wrote 10, funeral card mailed after burial 11, no personal details included 12, no mention of mother 13, felt deliberately impersonal. Then I stopped. The truth wasn't just in the facts. It was in how it felt. So I wrote again, underlined this time 14. I felt erased. I looked around my kitchen, everything in its place. My tea mug, her photo on the fridge, the same yellow dish towel she once used to wipe her sticky fingers after stealing jam. That girl existed. She was real. And now there wasn't even proof we'd shared a life. I stood and walked to the drawer beneath the phone. Took out every card she'd ever sent me. Birthday, Christmas, little ones that said, "Thanks for driving me to practice." I laid them out on the table. Dozens of memories. All signed, "Love, Melanie." They couldn't take that. Not from these walls. Not from my hands. I turned back to the card, folded it, slipped it into the envelope. Then I wrote, in pen, across the front, "Return to sender. Mother not notified." And I placed it in the center of the table like a monument. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was remembering, fiercely. And remembering is a form of resistance. The hospital looked like any other. Brick and steel, frosted windows. That sterile smell that clings to your clothes and follows you home. I hesitated before pushing the door open. It felt wrong to be here. Too late. Too invisible. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I just needed to know if I'd ever existed in her story. The lobby was warm, but I still shivered. Grief had a cold of its own. At the front desk, a woman in navy scrubs looked up, her badge read, "Carry admissions." "I'm looking for a patient who passed last week," I said. Melanie Holloway Rhodes. She was my daughter. Carrie's face softened. "I'm sorry for your loss." She typed something into her computer. Her nails clicked like clock hands, too fast, too sharp. After a moment, she looked at me. "We can't release records without next of kin approval." "I'm not asking for records." Just was I ever listed as her emergency contact? She hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, softly, "I'm not supposed to say." I nodded. "I understand." We stayed in silence for a few seconds. The air felt thicker. Then she leaned slightly closer. "There's a copy room down the hall. Sometimes old charts sit there before scanning. If someone were to take a look, no one would stop them." She didn't meet my eyes again. I didn't say thank you. I just walked. The hallway smelled like bleach and artificial lemon, the kind of clean that couldn't hide what had happened here. I found the room, empty, fluorescent lights humming. Boxes lined the wall, labeled by date. I found the one for January and started flipping. Halfway through I saw it. Rhodes Melanie. My fingers slowed. I opened the file. The first few pages were clinical, lab tests, vitals, progress notes. Then I found the header I was searching for of emergency contact. My name was there, Janet Holloway, in soft blue ink, clear and legible. And then a single, harsh black line ran through it. Not erased, not replaced, just crossed out like a mistake. Next to the stroke, someone had written to no contact 2 words. That was all it took to erase a mother. I stared at it, tried to breathe through the pounding in my ears. No signature, no timestamp. Just that dark ink, angry, rushed. Someone had done this deliberately. Not a computer, Not a form, a person, someone who wanted me gone. I held the paper like it might tear in my hands. Behind me, a voice spoke. She called for her mom. I turned. A nurse stood in the doorway. Late 50s, maybe older. Gray hair, kind eyes, pale green scrubs. I was on shift. She was restless, in pain. She whispered it once. Mom? My heart clenched. She reached out. Like she thought someone would be there. I couldn't answer. She didn't say more. Just gave a nod, then walked away. I sat on the chair by the copier, the file still open in my lap. I looked at that black line again. They thought it was just ink. But to me it was a scar, and I would not let it heal quietly. I drove home without turning on the radio. The silence wasn't comforting. It was thick tight, like a sweater too small across the chest. The folder sat beside me on the passenger seat, its corner digging into my coat. A paper, thin weapon, but powerful. That page, with my name, then the line through it, had more weight than anything I'd held since she was born. Once home, I walked straight past the kitchen, past the coat rack. Still wearing my shoes. Still cold. I set the folder on the dining table and pulled out the page. It was just as I remembered, neat blue ink spelling, Janet Holloway. Then a single violent black line through the middle. Next to it, no contact. I stared at the ink until the letters blurred. It felt like a bruise. I opened the hallway closet and pulled out a roll of masking tape. The wall in the den was blank except for a faded calendar from last year. I took that down. Then I taped the page up. Center of the wall. Dead center. It stood there like an accusation. I went to my notebook and flipped back to the page from the hospital. I read what I had written the night before. 1. Funeral card mailed after burial. 2. No call from family. 3. Vera said Melanie tried to visit. 4. Melanie's name listed under emergency contact, later crossed out. 5. Nurse confirmed. She whispered, Mom. Then I turned the page. Wrote in big, careful letters, 1. Firest, Pierre-Ofe, O-F-E-R-S-R. I underlined it twice. I wrote beneath, no digital edit, manual black ink, no timestamp, no initials, not a mistake, a removal. I closed the notebook. My hands were shaking again. This time, not from grief, from clarity. I walked to the kitchen, made tea, stood there while the kettle hissed. My body moved on instinct, boil, steep, pour. But my mind was in that room, staring at that wall. I brought the mug with me and sat down across from it. Just me and a piece of paper. Just me and a truth too clean to deny. I thought of the first time I held Melanie. She was tiny, red-faced, fists curled. They placed her in my arms and someone said, She knows your voice? She had, until someone made sure she couldn't hear it again. I wasn't angry. Not yet. It was something colder than that. Resolve. This wasn't just a missed funeral anymore. It was a pattern, a slow undoing of my place in her life. And maybe hers in mine. I reached for a pen and wrote one last line on the notebook. Someone wanted me gone. Then I looked up at the wall again. It wasn't much, just one document, one mark of ink, but it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings are louder than endings. The house was quiet, not the peaceful kind, the kind that grows heavy, presses on your ribs, fills the corners like smoke. I stopped counting the days since the funeral I wasn't invited to, since I saw her name, and mine, on a hospital chart, joined then severed by a single black line. No one had called. Not a neighbor, not a cousin, not a single soul from her side of the family. There was a time I couldn't go 2 days without someone checking in, asking about my art classes, inviting me to coffee. Now, the phone didn't ring. I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook, staring at the wall I'd begun to build. One document. A few index cards, still sparse, still lonely, just like me. I missed her voice, not just Melanie's, though that too ached. I missed my own. The way I used to speak freely, joke loudly, ramble about memories no one else remembered. Lately, I found myself whispering, even when I was alone, as if I too was fading. I opened the pantry, realized I hadn't bought groceries in a week. My fridge held milk gone sour and a half-eaten jar of jam. I closed it and sat back down. I was tired, but not in the way sleep could solve. I closed my eyes, just to rest them, and then the phone rang. I jumped. The sound pierced the silence like a scream in a chapel. It wasn't the landline. It was my old flip phone, buried in a drawer. I scrambled for it, flipped it open. A number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. Hello. A pause. A breath. Then, Grandma? My heart stopped. Emily? My voice cracked. Is that you, sweetheart? Another pause. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I'm not supposed to call. I sat down slowly, hand over my mouth. I used someone's phone. She continued. A friend from school. I tried to hold back the tears. I didn't think I'd ever hear your voice again. I miss you, she said. So much. Silence. Then she added, Dad said you're not safe. That you're confused. But I don't believe him. I closed my eyes, chest heavy. You're always safe with me, Emily. Always. I know, she whispered. I heard a door creak on her end. Her breath caught. I have to go, she said quickly. I just wanted to hear you. Just once. Call me anytime, I said. Please. But the line had already gone dead. I sat frozen, phone still pressed to my ear. Her voice echoed in my head, soft, unsure, but real. She remembered me. She still believed me. And maybe that was enough for today. After Emily's call, the silence in the house felt different. It no longer pressed on my ribs. It circled the edges of the room like a question left unanswered. I couldn't sit still. My body moved on its own. From the living room to the den to the kitchen and back again. I needed something, not comfort, not food, proof, a thread to pull. I remembered a voicemail. Melanie had left it on Christmas Eve 2 years ago. I'd been washing dishes when I heard it ring. I let it go to voicemail, played it once, then deleted it. At least I thought I had. But sometimes the old laptop saved things. I dug it out from the hallway closet, dusty, heavy, the kind with a worn keyboard and a battery that died in 10 minutes. I plugged it in, fingers trembling. While it booted, I opened the drawer beside the fridge. Inside, birthday cards, receipts, junk coupons, and a flash drive. I didn't remember what was on it. I plugged it in anyway. The screen blinked. Then a folder to phone backups 2021. My breath caught. I opened it, and there it was. 2024 Melanie. Wav, I stared at the file like it might disappear if I blinked. I clicked play. Her voice filled the room, shaky at first.
Hi, Mom, it's Melanie.
I just wanted to say Merry Christmas. A pause. Too long. I hope you're doing okay. I know things have been busy. Her tone dipped on that last word. Like it held more than it said. She cleared her throat, coughed once. Caleb says hi. Maybe we'll stop by next week if things settle down. Another pause. I love you, Mom. I really do. A click. It ended there. I sat still, hands resting on the counter. That wasn't how she used to sound. Melanie always sang in her voicemails, even in her 30s, even when life got messy. But that voice, it wasn't playful. It was tired, controlled, like someone might be listening. I replayed it 3 times. By the 4th, I had pulled out my notebook and started transcribing every word. Not just the words, the pauses, the cough, the hesitation before. Caleb says hi. Everything mattered now. I printed the transcript, cut the lines into strips. Then I walked to the wall in the den, the same wall where the hospital document hung, next to the funeral card. I taped Melanie's words beneath them. A new piece, a softer clue, but a clue nonetheless. I stepped back. There were only 3 things on the wall, but they pulsed. With absence. With what had been taken. With what had been said, and what hadn't. I ran my hand along the edge of the page. She had tried. Maybe not in words sharp enough for a court, but in tone, in tremble, in timing. My daughter had whispered for help the only way she could, and I hadn't heard her. Not then, but I did now. I whispered to the wall, I'm sorry I was late. Then I picked up a fresh page and began again. The invitation came in the mail, no return address, just a white envelope, typed label, and inside, a folded card, please join us for an evening in loving memory of Melanie Holloway Rhodes. Saturday, 6 p.m. 14, Sandridge Lane. No, dear Mom, no signature. Just the date, the time, and the address. Still, I ironed my best navy blouse, combed my hair twice, brought the lemon tart Melanie used to love. It felt right. Or maybe, I just needed it to feel like something. The house stood large at the end of a long cul-de-sac, Caleb's sister Rachel's place. Bigger than mine. Polished, the kind with stone fountains and doors that opened before you even knocked. Rachel answered, wearing a silk wrap and holding a glass of wine. She blinked. Oh, no warmth, no hug, just that single syllable. Like I was early to a party I wasn't really invited to. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said.
Well, come in.
Inside, people floated between the kitchen and patio. Lauder bounced off the marble countertops. Soft jazz hummed through the speakers. Everyone looked relaxed. No one looked at me. I stepped in, holding the tart like an offering. Rachel pointed at the kitchen island. You can set that down there. I did. Then stood there, alone, forgotten, until she waved me over with a flick of her hand. Would you mind helping plate the hors d'oeuvres? You know how Melanie liked things neat. It wasn't a question. I moved toward the counter.
Gloves, platters, napkins.
I said nothing. Behind me, someone whispered, Is that her? The mother? Another replied. I thought she moved away. Lauder. The kind that comes too quick, too forced. I laid out the shrimp skewers. My fingers trembled slightly. I tried to blame it on the cold tray. Rachel came up behind me. Make sure the napkins are folded into triangles. Melanie hated rectangles. Then she walked away before I could answer. As if I were the help. As if I hadn't carried Melanie through 23 hours of labor. Held her through fevers. Cried the first time she said, "Mama." I kept folding. Fold. Press. Turn. Like a penance. Caleb never came over to greet me. Neither did his parents. I wasn't seated at the main table. My place card, if there was one, never appeared. I found a chair near the hallway, behind a potted plant. I ate nothing, said nothing. Just watched them raise their glasses to her, my daughter, without once saying my name. At one point, Rachel clinked a fork against her glass and stood. "To Melanie," she said, lifting her glass. "The brightest soul, the most graceful." Heads nodded. Caleb smiled, eyes damp. I waited. For something, anything, a mention, a memory. But her words ended there. Not a single person in that room said the word mother. Not once. As the others returned to laughing. Eating, living, I sat with my hands folded in my lap. The lemon tart sat untouched. No one even asked who made it. At some point, the wine glasses ran low. People drifted back into the kitchen, chatting about ski season and property taxes, and whether the local market still sold imported olives. I stood by the sink, hands clasped. The tart sat where I left it, untouched. Rachel slid beside me, her heels clicking sharp against the tile. "Would you mind wiping down the counters?" she said casually, sipping from her glass. "Melanie always said you were the only one who could get the granite to shine." I turned to her slowly. Her face was pleasant, empty, not cruel, just hollow. I looked at the sponge she placed beside me. Soft blue, smelled like citrus. "I think it's sweet," she continued. "Oh, you still like to help. Some mothers don't even show up. You know, the room blurred. Not from tears, from heat, from shame. From the sting of recognizing what was happening. This wasn't kindness. This was a script. And I had been cast, not as Melanie's mother, but as the quiet woman in the background. The helper, the hands, not the heart. I picked up the sponge. My fingers curled around it. I remembered Melanie at 8, standing on a step stool, wiping the counter with far too much spray, giggling. "You missed a spot, Mom." I had smiled, taken the sponge, cleaned beside her. Back then, it was ours, a rhythm between us. Now, it was a role being handed back to me, minus the laughter, minus the daughter. I placed the sponge down carefully, then walked to the dessert table. The tart looked lonely, like a guest who arrived without a name card. I lifted it, found a plastic container, and packed it away. No one noticed, no one cared. Not even Caleb, who brushed past me carrying a tray of empty glasses without a single glance. They had rebuilt Melanie's world without me, rewritten her memory, edited me out. I reached for my coat. "Rachel appeared again too quick? Heading out already?" she asked. "There's a photo slideshow later." I held her gaze. "I think I've seen enough." She smiled politely. "Well, thanks for coming. It meant a lot." Melanie would have loved that tart. I didn't answer. Didn't remind her that Melanie hadn't tasted that tart in years, because she'd never been allowed to visit long enough for dessert. I stepped outside. The cold bit through my coat, but I didn't shiver. The sky was clear, sharp stars above. My car was parked 3 houses down. They'd needed the driveway for family. I walked slowly, the tart in one hand, keys in the other. With every step, the noise from the house dimmed. By the time I reached the car, it was silent again. The kind of silence that didn't ask for permission, that didn't apologize. I slid into the driver's seat, placed the tart on the passenger side, and for the first time that evening I exhaled, long, steady, certain. They could host their party, raise their glasses, curate their memories. But I had mine, and I wasn't done building them. I couldn't sleep after the party, not from noise, not from nightmares, but from clarity. Humiliation, when it's public, is loud. But when it lingers after, when it echoes in the quiet of your own home, that's when it sharpens. I stood in the kitchen at midnight, fingers curled around a mug I didn't drink from. They'd erased me, not in screams but in smiles, not with force, but with folded napkins and missing name cards. And I had let them. For years, that realization burned more than their silence. I needed something solid, something real, something that couldn't be dismissed. I walked to the hall closet and pulled out the plastic bin marked Melanie Health. In faded Sharpie, it had sat untouched since her college days. Inside, immunization records, dental charts, a photo of her missing tooth taped to a dentist receipt. I flipped past it all. then found a beige envelope tucked at the bottom. It had her handwriting. Billing 2022, my fingers tingled. Inside were 3 documents and a treatment invoice from Sate. Mary's Oncology, a handwritten list of prescriptions, a payment slip stamped, PAI'd. The date on the invoice was August 3, 2022, $12,560. My eyes scanned the footer. A paid via account ending in 8411, my heart stilled. Melanie's checking account ended in 2294. Always had. She opened the summer before college. I had helped her memorize the routing number. I still remembered the branch manager's name. Dottie. This number was different. Foreign. I double-checked the other documents. Nowhere else was that number listed. No explanation, no signature. Just the silent suggestion that someone else had been paying. Someone I didn't know. Or maybe someone I did. I opened my notebook, turned to a fresh page. AWAL 3 FIANAL Day NCY invoice dated August 3, 2022 Hospital St. Mary's Oncology amount. The $12,560 paid from account ending in 8411. Melanie's known account ends in 2294. No co. Signer listed envelope marked in her handwriting. I tapped my pen against the page. Thought back. Melanie had never mentioned financial trouble. Never asked for help. And I'd assumed she was proud, independent. But maybe she'd been prevented. From asking, from choosing, from using her own money. My chest tightened. What kind of person intercepts payments from a cancer patient? What kind of person hides behind kindness? I returned to the wall and pinned the invoice beside the voicemail transcript. Now it looked like a map. A network of quiet theft. Emotional. Medical. Financial and by line. They had cut me out. But now I was tracing them back in. Not with noise, but with evidence. I ran my fingers across the paper. That account number pulsed. Not just a string of digits, but a key to something I wasn't supposed to see. And that made me want to see it even more. It took me 2 days to go to the bank. Not from fear. From pacing. I wanted to walk in with the right questions, not emotions. So I practiced. I rehearsed what to say while folding laundry, while boiling eggs, while staring at my wall of quiet proof. Then, on a Wednesday morning, I drove across town. The bank sat between a dry cleaner and a florist, just as it had 20 years ago when Melanie first opened her account. The inside hadn't changed much. Still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and printer ink. A young woman greeted me at the front desk, but I asked specifically for Dottie. She's on break? The girl said. Would you like to wait?
I nodded.
10 minutes later, Dottie appeared from behind a frosted glass door, her hair still tied back in the same tidy bun I remembered. She paused when she saw me. Janet. I smiled gently. Hi, Dottie. It's been a while. She walked over, expression shifting. I heard about Melanie. I'm so sorry. Thank you, I said. I'm trying to understand a few things. She led me to her desk. I sat down, placed the hospital invoice between us. I found this, I said. The account number doesn't match the one Melanie always used. Dottie leaned in, scanned it. 804011, she murmured. That's not hers, I said. Dottie tapped her keyboard. Paused. Do you have documentation proving your next of kin? She asked. I slid over a notarized copy of the death certificate. She looked at it, then back at me. There was a change, she said carefully. In July 2021? What kind of change? An authorized user added, she said. With full access? Withdrawals, deposits, everything? My mouth went dry. Name? I asked, though I didn't expect her to answer. She didn't. But she didn't deny it either. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard, then she glanced at the print button. I can't give you personal client details, she said softly, but I can provide a record of account authorization changes. If you're listed as next of kin.
I am,
I whispered. Dottie printed the page, handed it to me in a plain white envelope. I nodded. Thank you. She placed her hand over mine. She trusted you, she said. I remember how close you two were. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't speak. Not because I was angry, because I was full of knowing, of confirmation, of grief, of something colder than both. I walked out, the envelope warm in my hand from the printer. When I got home, I didn't take off my coat. Just walked to the den. Opened the envelope. At the top it account Melanie H. Rhodes auth change recorda. Below it of authorized signatory added July 15, 2021 of relationship spouse. Of access is full no signature from Melanie no note. Just the line. I printed a clean copy. Labeled it with red ink, AWL for Keteral transfer, then pinned it next to the financial discrepancy. Now the timeline was clearer. July 2021 control moved. August 2022 hospital paid from unknown account. October 2022 funeral held without her mother. December 2022 voicemail too soft, too late. I stepped back. 4 pieces, 4 whispers of a woman being slowly erased. But I was still here, and I was starting to speak. The night didn't want to end. It clung to the walls, thick and still, like it was holding its breath. I'd tried lying in bed. Eyes closed, hands folded. But sleep wouldn't come. Not after the envelope from Dottie. Not after the truth printed in black and white. Control transferred, July 2021 without my name. I wrapped myself in David's old robe, still faintly smelling of cedar and soap, and walked to the living room. The floor creaked soft and slow, as if the house itself was watching me move. The wall greeted me. 5 papers now, each pinned in neat rows. Hospital chart, voicemail, payment slip, authorization record, my own handwriting, scrawled in ink and trimmer. My daughter didn't forget me. Someone made her forget herself. I stood there, arms crossed, the cold biting gently at my ankles. This wasn't grief anymore. It was something sharper. I remembered a winter night years ago. David and I in the same room, Melanie asleep upstairs. He was watching the news, frowning. A segment about coercive control in marriages. I made a joke. Something about how lucky I was he let me keep the remote. He didn't laugh. Control doesn't start loud, he said. It starts quiet, with isolation dressed up as protection. I looked at him, confused. He continued, with one person slowly becoming the translator of another's life. She's tired today. She's not up for company. She didn't want that job anyway. And one day you realize she stopped speaking for herself? I'd forgotten that, or maybe I hadn't let it settle. But now it bloomed. Every voicemail Melanie didn't return. Every visit postponed. Every gift returned unopened. I thought she was busy. I thought she was tired. I thought no, I had hoped. Because hope is easier than asking why someone stops reaching back. I pulled a chair closer to the wall. Sat down. Let my fingers trace the edge of each paper. The hospital bill. The bank change. The silence in her voice. None of it shouted. But together they roared. I pulled out my notebook again. Wrote slowly. She didn't lose herself. She was overwritten. So I looked at the sentence. Let it sit. Then tore the page and pinned it up. Moal 6 IDNPUR plagid. My chest rose tight and uneven. Tears didn't come. Not anymore. I'd cried enough in the early weeks. The kind of crying that has no direction, no meaning. Now there was focus. I wasn't just grieving a daughter. I was searching for her. For the version of her that was buried beneath someone else's words, decisions, controls. And I wasn't going to stop. Not tonight, not anymore. I couldn't stay seated. The wall pulsed in the silence. I stood. Poured myself half a glass of water. Didn't drink it. The air tasted like old grief. My laptop sat in the corner, dusty, forgotten. I hadn't opened it in weeks, maybe months. But something pulled me toward it. A thought. A thread. I opened the lid. The screen flickered, slow to wake. The battery begged for power. I plugged it in. Then waited. Once it blinked to life, I clicked into my email. 53 unread messages. Mostly junk. I typed her name into the search bar. Melanie Rhodes. It loaded instantly. 6 messages, all from before she got sick. The newest one, dated November 14, 2021. Subject line blank.
I clicked.
There was no greeting, no sign off. Just 5 words. Are you still there, Mom? That was it. No follow-up. No context. Just that single line. Centered. Lonely, my heart dropped into my stomach. I remembered that day. I had been repainting the pantry, trying to keep busy. Trying not to hover. I'd seen the notification, told myself I'd reply later. Then I forgot. By the time I remembered again, it felt awkward. So much time had passed. I convinced myself she'd call if it mattered. But now those 5 words echoed louder than any scream. They weren't casual, they were searching. A hand in the dark. And I had missed it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Pointless now. Too late. I moved the cursor, clicked print. The machine coughed to life. The page came out. Warm. Curled slightly at the edges. I stared at it for a full minute. Then took it to the wall. I didn't pin it at the bottom. I placed it right in the center, below the chart, above the bank record, dead in the middle of the mess, like a pulse. Like a heart. Or YL7TX hey last KL. I stepped back. That one line hurt more than the rest combined. Because it had been a door. A chance. And I didn't walk through it. I reached out and touched the paper. Ran my finger across the letters. Are you still there, Mom? I whispered. I am now. No one answered. But for the first time, I didn't feel alone in the room. She had reached out, and I had missed her. But I wouldn't miss what came next. I woke before sunrise. No alarm, just a feeling like a gear had clicked into place during sleep. I brewed coffee. Black, no sugar. pulled out my notebook and read every page again. Well 1 to well 7, each entry sharper now, not just grief markers, but coordinates. By 7:10 am, I was at my desk. I powered up the desktop computer David used to manage our taxes. It took a while. The fan wheezed. The screen flickered. But it worked. I logged into Melanie's old shared cloud folder, one we used to swap recipes and photos when she first moved out. Caleb probably forgot it existed. Buried under vacation pictures and grocery lists was a folder labeled Legal Private. I clicked. There it was, a PDF titled Estate Trust Amendment 2019. In my hand steadied. The document opened, 11 pages long, dated 2 years before Melanie fell ill. She had established a small trust account, modest but real, $42,000 in mixed investments, dividends reinvested, her name listed as primary beneficiary, to be updated. But no update ever came. That trust wasn't mentioned at the funeral, wasn't listed in any obituary or probate summary. I opened my bank app. Not Melanie's, mine. Selected external transfer, slow, deliberate. I moved a test amount, do 1 altered from the trust to my own holding account still under my name and David's. The transaction pinged. Pending. Then I wrote a message to Melanie's old attorney, Sheila Langford. She and David had once shared a case in the 90s. A subjectee, quiet matter. A body. Sheila? I found a trust document under Melanie's files dated 2019. Please confirm if you still manage or have access to this. If not, I would like to discuss its current standing. Regards, Janet Holloway? I didn't sign off with. Hope you're well. This wasn't a friendly check-in. This was a reckoning. I clicked send. Then opened another tab. Type State of Montana. Power of attorney filings. Public records aren't always fast. But with enough filters, enough patience, they speak. I search at Caleb Rodas, 7 results. 3 tied to property filings. 1-2 medical POM Holloway Roads, 2021. My stomach turned. I clicked. Access restricted. Only family or named parties could request the full document. But I had a record now. I printed the result page. Labeled it in red. Woel ake medical puo r ofy felity. Each click, each form, each confirmation. It didn't feel like justice yet. It felt like breathing. Like I'd been underwater for 4 years and finally found the surface. This wasn't rage. It wasn't vengeance. It was quiet correction. They'd erased me from her story, but they had left fingerprints. Now I was collecting them. Not for spectacle, not for noise, just to hold the truth in my own hands again. I didn't need them to believe it. I just needed it to exist. The next folder came from a dusty thumb drive I found in an old kitchen drawer. Melanie had mailed it to me back in 2019. A backup just in case, she said. I'd never opened it. Until now. I plugged it in, a simple directory popped up, photos, recipes, docs. Under ducks, a single file caught my eye. Seedlight initial draft. Pef, I opened it. 3 pages, a draft application to open a donor-advised fund, set up through a Montana Community Foundation, purpose to support early education for first-generation children. Say name of the fund is Seedlight Future Start. Fund primary contributor Melanie H. Roads amount pledged, $2,000. Status initial, pending funder match. The last edit date Eve, October 11, 2020. That was 4 months before her first treatment. My throat tightened. I remembered that fall. She had mentioned Faf working on something hopeful. I'd thought it was just a new painting. I clicked into the fund's public site, typed the name. It appeared grayed out, inactive in review as but not closed, not deleted, just waiting. I read the small print. Inactive funds may be reactivated within 3 years of lapse upon contact by original contributor or legally designated representative. I stared at the line, then clicked Contact Us, typed slowly. A subject, a request to reactivate donor advised fund message. Dear Montana Community Foundation, I am writing as the mother of Melanie H. Rhodes, the original fund contributor to the Seedlight Future Start Fund, inactive as of 2022. I would like to request the reactivation and repurposing of this fund in her honor. Please advise on next steps for documentation. Sincerely, Janet Holloway. I didn't cry. Not yet. There was one more box to check. Name of fund, editable field. I hovered. Then type Melanie's voice fund. It felt simple and enormous. I didn't ask for fanfare, no press, no family announcement. Just the truth, that she tried to create something for children she'd never meet, that she left a seed behind, that I could water it. I clicked submit. Confirmation email received. Pending approval. Pending nothing. I sat back. Stared at the wall again, 8 pieces now. But this one didn't go up with the others. This one I kept in a folder labeled Awoela 9 Tia Rakela Amtiwine, because it wasn't evidence of what was stolen. It was proof of what still lived. Of the version of Melanie that hadn't been overwritten. Of the voice she was trying to give, not just to children, but to herself. And now through me to the world, not loud, not angry, just firm and free. The email came at 8:12 a.m. No subject. Just 5 words in the preview bar. She's still protected, for now. It was from Sheila. I sat very still before opening it. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't notice. The message was short. The trust was untouched. Still in Melanie's name, still valid. No co-trustee had ever been named. But Caleb had filed a motion, a formal petition to transfer control of the trust to himself. Hearing scheduled next Tuesday, 10:00 a.m., only 7 days. 7 days between silence and a signature that could erase her last will. I leaned back in my chair. The room felt smaller. Not because I was afraid. Because something precious had just moved 1 inch closer to vanishing. I called Sheila. She picked up, voice clipped but kind. Janet? I'll go, I said. You don't have to, she replied. I can file a challenge remotely. I'm not hiding behind paperwork. I closed my eyes. I need to be in the room. A pause. Then she said, Then I'll be there with you. We hung up. I got up slowly, walked to the mirror in the hallway, looked at my reflection like I hadn't in years. Pale skin, silver roots, eyes soft from too many apologies, but under it all steel. That's what David used to say. You're not fire, he'd tell me. You're steel. Quiet, shaped by pressure. I whispered now, to no one. She's still protected, but not if I stay quiet. Back at my desk, I pulled a fresh manila folder from the drawer. Wrote on the front in bold black inky, Milanitio Keep inside. I placed the original trust document, printout of Sheila's email, Melanie's last message, a photo of her at 22, laughing in her cap and gown. I paused before closing the folder. Then added one more thing, a blank index card. On it I wrote, Because she reached out and no one else heard, thus I tucked it in front. Not for the court. For me, I packed the folder into my canvas bag, set it gently by the door. Then I sat in the armchair by the window, the one Melanie spilled tea on in 2004. I'd never cleaned the spot fully. Now I was glad. My fingers brushed the faded stain. She tried, I said aloud. She really did. I looked down at my hands, veined, thin-skinned, still strong enough to turn a key, then whispered again like a promise, It's my name too. I arrived 15 minutes early, not too impressed to breathe. The courthouse lobby smelled of copy toner and old floor wax. I remembered it from years ago, traffic court, a witness summons, a permit appeal. But this time I wasn't background. This time I was mother. Sheila met me at the door, dressed in navy. Calm, she handed me a folder. Here's your copy, you don't have to say much. Just be present. I'm good at that, I said softly. We walked in, room 4B. It wasn't large, maybe 20 chairs, a long wooden table. A single judge behind a worn oak bench. Caleb was already there. Navy suit, impeccable tie. He didn't look at me. I didn't look away. His lawyer stood beside him. Young, sharp, hair like a magazine model. I wondered if he rehearsed objections in the mirror. The judge called us to order. Procedures began, name, claim basis. Caleb's lawyer spoke first. He painted a calm portrait. Loving husband, sole surviving spouse, applicant for legal closure, custodian of estate and trust, nothing unusual, just paperwork to finalize a sad chapter. Sheila stood, said little. Then the judge turned to me. Ms. Holloway, you're listed as the decedent's mother. Do you wish to speak? I nodded. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't waver. Yes. I stood. Walked to the front, not too fast, not hesitant. Then Caleb's lawyer interrupted. Your Honor, he said, before Ms. Holloway continues, we'd like to ask a procedural question. The judge nodded. The young man turned to me. Ms. Holloway, why do you believe you have a say in this? The room stilled. Even Caleb turned. I didn't move. Didn't flare. Didn't fumble through legal terms or parental rights. I simply said, because she wrote to me when no one else listened. The words weren't dramatic. They were real. And realness doesn't need a microphone. No one spoke. The judge's pen paused. Sheila looked at me. That was all. I returned to my seat. No applause, no rebuttal. But the air felt changed. Not shifted by volume, shifted by gravity. The courtroom emptied slowly. No one clapped. No one cried. But I stayed seated, waiting for the clerk to finish typing. The judge hadn't ruled in full. She requested a 30-day hold, official reason, to allow submission of any supporting documents reflecting the decedent's informal intent. Not a win. Not a loss. But a breath. And in this process, breaths mattered. Caleb looked sideways at me as he gathered his papers. Still no words, but his jaw had tightened, just slightly. I wondered if he had expected silence from me again. Not this time. Sheila leaned in. They didn't grant his motion? I nodded. I heard. We left the courtroom. The hall was quiet. Outside, the sky was flat and gray. No snow, no rain, just that in-between color Montana wears when winter won't end and spring won't begin. Sheila offered me a ride home.
I declined.
I need to walk. She squeezed my shoulder.
You did good.
Thanks, I said. You did too. I walked 3 blocks before I realized I was holding the folder to my chest, not in my bag. Close, protected. Inside was everything I'd said without saying. Melanie's words, her files, her voice in 5 printed pages and 1 photo. I stopped by the cafe she used to like, a tiny place with windows that fog in winter, ordered chamomile tea, sat by the glass, watched people pass, unaware. The cup warmed my palms. Steam brushed my face. That courtroom hadn't restored anything. It hadn't given back years. It hadn't undone silence. But it had named me, out loud. And that mattered more than I expected. For years, I'd been a footnote in my own daughter's life. Now, in an official transcript, there'd be a sentence that said, Ems. Holloway asserts the decedent expressed continued contact through written correspondence. That was all. 1 line. But lines add up. Especially when they were once denied. I pulled out the index card again. The one I'd slipped behind her photo. Read it slowly? Because she reached out, and no one else heard. I flipped it over. Wrote a new line. This is her name too?
Not mine.
Hers, still hers? I paid my bill, tucked the card into my coat pocket, then stepped back outside. The wind had picked up, but I walked straight into it. The house was colder than I remembered. I kicked off my shoes, hung up my coat, and let the silence settle. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, because I had no tears left for battles that weren't over yet. The manila folder sat on the table, still zipped shut. I made tea, stirred it twice, forgot the honey, then walked to the hallway closet and reached up high, where things I didn't want to see used to live. Pulled down the photo frame. It was Melanie. Her hair caught in wind, eyes half laughing, wearing a scarf I'd knitted that she said smelled like winter. I had taken it down the night after her funeral. That night, after Caleb's stiff handshake and the short prayer, when no one said her name unless they had to. I couldn't bear to see her smile when no one remembered why it mattered, but now I held it again. The glass was clean, no dust. I'd wrapped it well. She was still there, still mine. I walked to the fireplace, set the frame on the mantel, next to David's wooden box and a ceramic bird Melanie made at 9. It felt right. Like space was being restored. I turned on the lamp beside the sofa, then ladled soup from the crock pot, the one I'd forgotten I started before leaving for court, chicken and wild rice. David's favorite. As I set the bowl down, a soft knock echoed. Not urgent. Just present. I opened the door. Emily stood there, no coat, fuzzy socks, backpack over one shoulder. She didn't speak, just held up a rolled sleeping bag and shrugged. I stepped aside. She walked in. Drop the bag! Sniffed the air! Soup! She asked. Chicken, I said. And rice. She nodded. Cool. We ate in the living room. No TV. No phones. Just the soft clink of spoons and the sound of wind scratching the window frame. Halfway through, she looked up. I saw the trust document, she said. I paused, spoon mid-air. You left it on the printer, she added. Not snooping. I smiled. Wasn't hiding it. She nodded again. Then, quieter. He told me you didn't want to be involved. That you said you were too tired. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to say I wasn't tired. Just shut out. But instead, I reached for her hand, held it lightly. She didn't pull away. I'm here now, I said.
Yeah, she whispered.
Me too, and we just sat there, 2 bowls cooling on the coffee table. 2 women, 1 name apart, breathing in the same room again. I woke to the smell of eggs and burnt toast. The house wasn't silent, it was warm. Emily was in the kitchen, hair pulled up, wearing one of my old sweatshirts that hung to her knees. She poked at a skillet with far more confidence than skill. You're up early, I said. She turned. I didn't sleep much? Too cold? She shook her head. Too quiet, I smiled. Welcome to the woods. She flipped something resembling an omelette onto a chipped blue plate. It's not pretty, she said. But it's hot. That's more than enough. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. Light poured through the window, pale, winter, filtered. No words, for a moment. Then Emily broke the silence. Did she write a will? I sipped my coffee. No, nothing formal. She didn't want to. She tried, I said. But she ran out of time, and space, Emily looked down at her plate. I always thought she was tired, angry, but now I wonder. I waited. She was quieter than I remembered. Toward the end, I nodded. That wasn't her choice. Emily's fork stopped. I think I knew something was wrong, she said. But I didn't know how to ask. I stood up, went to the shelf, pulled out a small folder. Inside a single page, printout of the fund confirmation, Melanie's Voice Fund. I handed it to her. She started something, I said. Didn't finish it, but she tried. This was her seed. Emily read the paper. Touched the top corner with her thumb. What do you want to do with it? She asked. I want to build it, I said. Not big, just right. She looked up. Can I help? You already are. Her eyes softened. You really think this matters? I didn't answer right away. I looked at the photo of Melanie on the fridge, faded and curling at the edge. Then back at Emily. If we don't tell her story, I said, someone else will, or worse, no one will. Ooh, Emily folded the paper gently. I want her to be known. I nodded. Then let's start there. She stood, carried her plate to the sink. I'll finish breakfast next time, she said, without burning anything. I smiled. I won't hold my breath. She laughed, really laughed. And in that sound, for a flicker of a moment, I heard Melanie again, not gone. Just continuing. The cabin wasn't much. One room, a narrow porch, a stove that creaked. And the lake, always the lake. Flathead shimmered like brushed steel in springtime. I moved in late March. No announcements. No ribbon cutting. Just a decision. A choice to be where sound didn't have to rise to be heard. The town had changed, but not the post office clerk. He smiled when I handed over a mail-forward form. You staying long? He asked. I nodded. As long as I need. I spent the first few days cleaning. Dust in the corners, cobwebs behind the dresser. But underneath it all, the bones of peace. Then I built the shelf. David would have laughed. It leaned left at first, but I adjusted. 6 rows of books. Some mine, some Melanie's, some donated. No sign, just a small wooden plaque above it, burned in letters. Melanie's Voice! Not a library. Not a statement. Just presence. People stopped by. Sometimes they left a note in the jar. Sometimes just a flower. It was enough. One morning in April, I heard wheels on gravel. Emily's voice before I saw her. She came around the path, 2 students in tow, girls with notebooks, wind jackets, wide eyes. Grandma, Emily called. Hope you don't mind. Do I ever? They unpacked a box. Children's books, poetry zines, a few journals. We're starting a writing workshop, she said. With the fund. I stood at the top of the porch. Watched her arrange the books without needing direction. The wind picked up. Pages fluttered. Laughter spilled into the morning. And I sat back, hands in my lap, heart open but calm. This wasn't a beginning. Not really, it was the middle, finally allowed to breathe. The sun dipped low behind the pine trees, casting long shadows across the porch steps. The lake held still like it was listening. Emily sat beside me, curled into her blanket, mug in both hands. The steam rose into the cool dusk air. Chamomile, her choice. We didn't talk for a long time. I watched the water change color. From silver to rose to that soft, almost blue that only comes just before night falls. The kind of light Melanie loved to paint. Emily finally spoke. Do you think she sees this? Her voice wasn't hopeful. It was scared. Scared of a silence that might never answer back. I didn't rush. I looked at her. Really looked. The same sharp brow? The same curve of her mouth. But something softer now. Something that belonged only to Emily. I turned back to the lake. I think she never stopped. Emily blinked, holding the mug closer to her chest. I used to dream of her, she whispered. But I was afraid to tell anyone. Thought they'd say it was guilt or imagination. Maybe it was both, I said. But that doesn't make it less real. A breeze picked up, brushing through the cedar trees. I pulled my cardigan tighter. She was always drawn to things unfinished, I said. Half-read books, unpainted canvases. The idea that something incomplete still had meaning. Emily smiled. Like us? I nodded. Exactly like us. We sat like that until the sky deepened into navy. The first stars peeked through. The moon, not yet full, hovered behind thin clouds. Then Emily stood. I'll head in. Big day tomorrow. She paused at the door. You coming? In a bit, I said. When she disappeared, I stayed. One more breath. One more listen. Then I went inside. The cabin was quiet, but not empty. On the small table by the bed, the notebook waited, the leather one Melanie gave me years ago. Inside the cover, her handwriting still whispered, "Write something that lives longer than grief." So I opened to the first blank page and wrote of This story was never mine alone. It was hers, and mine, and now ours. Sai closed the notebook, tucked it gently beneath my pillow, turned off the lamp, and for the first time in 4 winters, I fell asleep without needing to hold on to anything. Because it was already here,